I'm sorry, I heard my husband was brought in." As I ran into the treatment room, the eyes of the doctors, nurses, and my husband were all on me. I wondered at the momentary silence, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was assured that he was safe and that his life was not in danger for the time being. But the next moment was outrageous. My name is Tanya. I'm a 30-year-old nurse. My husband, Steve, is 2 years older than me and a government employee. Unlike my previous boyfriends, I was attracted to him because of his seriousness. I don't know if it's because of my profession as a nurse or my nature, but I don't have a hard time serving others, and I am happy when people depend on me. Hence, helping out my boyfriend, lending him money, and such things were a daily occurrence. Even though I knew in my head that I shouldn't do it, I would do it when I was asked to. Many of my fellow nurses are like that, and relationships are always a topic of our conversations. But then, a turning point came for me. I met my husband at a blind date with fellow nurses. He seemed quiet and serious. He was the type of guy I had never been around before, and I was attracted to him from the start. Other girls said he looked too serious or plain, and there were no rivals. We exchanged contact information after a strong push from me. I was also the one who asked him to go out with me. The relationship lasted 3 years. It's been a smooth relationship, with no conflict or betrayals. Many relationships break up after a few months, and it would have been better if the relationship had lasted a year, but with Steve it had lasted 3 years. I said to him, "Well, things are going to continue to go well. Shall we get married?" He proposed to me, and we got married. My husband had little dating experience, and his hobbies were reading and playing games at home. He was someone who rarely went out, but he was a bookworm and never ran out of topics to talk about. He is not a fan of the outdoors, but he seems to have a lot of gaming buddies, and we often play games while talking online. He says that since he started dating me, he has had more opportunities to go out. He was interested in it just because he didn't have anyone to go to, and he enjoys it wherever we go. My in-laws are a bit far away, about a 2-hour drive. I have the impression that my in-laws are gentle people. But Steve is the youngest of 3 siblings, and his in-laws are quite elderly, so we don't get to see them often. After meeting them at the wedding and the wedding ceremony, we only went to greet them once, at New Year's. We exchanged mid-year and year-end gifts, and I do call them, but I work nights, so our hours don't match, and I don't get a chance to talk to them very often. My husband and I go out somewhere when our days off coincide, and we do our share of the household chores. I thought we were doing well. However, it was about 3 months ago that I sensed something was wrong with my husband. When I came home after work, he was asleep on the sofa. A beer can was lying on the table. "You'll catch a cold," I said to him. He looked at me sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Isn't it unusual for you to be sleeping here and drinking beer?" I asked. "I was at an online drinking party with my gaming buddies. I was having too much fun and drank too much. I don't understand this world, but as long as my husband was having fun, I thought it was fine. But this was a mistake." After that, similar incidents continued, and one day when I saw my husband, I noticed that his hair had changed. "What's wrong with your hair?" He had never dyed his hair before, but now it was all done up and brown. "Is this hair okay at your job?" My husband is a government employee, and I thought he told me that the regulations are very strict. "What was wrong with it? I just thought recently that I should enjoy dressing up while I'm young. What do you think? Does it look good on me?" My husband was not a sophisticated man for his age, but he had suddenly changed, hadn't he? I'm not sure if it looks good on him or not, maybe because I'm not used to seeing it. But it doesn't look good on him. I didn't say it looked good on him. "Oh, I see," I simply replied. A few days later, he got his ears pierced. Again, I didn't think this looked good on him. Was he having a midlife crisis? I thought about that, but maybe he's having trouble with his job or something. "Hey, what's going on with you lately?" Unable to remain silent, I asked him straightforwardly, but he didn't give me a clear answer. "Nothing." And then my husband went to the bedroom. I knew I could not go on like this, but there was no one to fill in for the nurse who had retired not long ago, and I was so busy that I could no longer afford to pay attention to my husband. Around the time this was going on, Steve said, "My dad's not feeling well lately, so I'm going home for the weekend to check on him for a while." My father-in-law is old, and my husband must be worried about him. I nodded my head in agreement, and my husband began to leave the house every weekend. I tried to be considerate in my own way by cooking for him and texting him during work hours, but he rarely responded. Just when I thought it was time to have a proper discussion with him, I received an unbelievable call while I was at work. "Tanya, the police are trying to contact you." A colleague of mine called and passed the phone to me. "The police? Why?" I picked up the phone, feeling uneasy. He told me that Steve had been in an accident and had to be taken to the emergency room. What about my husband? Is he okay?" I was so upset that I questioned the police officer on the phone. He told me that he had heard it was not life-threatening and that he had been taken to our hospital where I worked. I rushed to the emergency ward. I asked the ward nurse where to find him and hurried to the treatment room. When I opened the door, I was met with the stares of the people there. "Excuse me, I heard my husband was brought in." The doctor looked doubtful, and the nurse's eyes swam. I felt uncomfortable, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was relieved. The nurse explained briefly. They said he had a leg injury that was so severe that they were going to cut his pants in order to treat him. When I looked at my husband again, his pants had already been cut off. Then my husband, noticing my gaze, shouted, "Tanya, don't look at me!" What? I'm a nurse, and I wonder if my husband thinks it's embarrassing for me to see him have his pants cut off? Certainly that may be the case, but it's common sense to cut off clothing when you can't remove it normally due to injury. "Just get out of here!" my husband shouted. I stood there, not understanding what was going on. Even though my husband screamed, the hands of the doctors and nurses did not stop rushing to treat him. It was only natural. If I listened to every word they said, it might take too much time and stall the procedure. Suddenly, something extraordinary grabs my attention. "What is that?" I muttered to myself. On the inside of my husband's thigh was a tattoo. The injury being treated was on his left leg, while the tattoo was on his right leg. Fortunately, the right leg did not appear to be damaged, and the eye was drawn to the leg that had been injured. Scrawled onto the inside of my husband's thigh is someone's name. It seems to be a woman's name. "Yasmin? Who?" My husband continued to be shocked by my words, but I got out of there once the procedure continued. I talked to a fellow nurse in the emergency ward who told me that apparently my husband had not been brought in alone. She said she thought it was a couple who was married or dating because he was brought in with a woman his own age who had been in the accident with him. When he checked the name of the woman who was transported with him, her first name is Yasmin. It matches the name on the tattoo. Does this mean they were having an affair? I kept asking myself. My coworker said she had brown hair and pierced ears and also had a tattoo with his name on it. It didn't add up. I asked the nurse who treated the woman, and she told me that my husband's name was also tattooed on her inner thigh. I think it's safe to say they are having an affair. But what kind of a nerve does a woman have to have the name of her cheating partner tattooed on her body? I can only think that she must be unstable. As I was thinking this, I remembered the call from the police. The police first called my mother and father-in-law's house, but my in-laws cannot drive, so they asked where I worked and called me. This means that my in-laws must be worried. So I called their house, and my father-in-law answered, "Is Steve gonna be all right?" He was worried, so I told him that Steve had been in an accident and had been taken to the hospital, but was not in life-threatening condition. My father-in-law's voice told me he was clearly relieved. So I asked him, "By the way, Dad, have you been feeling better?" My father-in-law said he had no idea what I was talking about. I clarified, "Because Steve said you were not feeling well and he's been gone every weekend. He said he was taking care of you." I had no idea. It was all a lie. I was relieved to hear that my father-in-law was in good health and that there was nothing wrong with him during his recent medical checkup, but the problem was, where was my husband going? If it wasn't to my in-laws' house, then it must have been to the place where he was having the affair. But I had no proof. After finishing my working hours, I went home without seeing my husband, who was admitted overnight for treatment. I went home and began to go through my husband's belongings, thoroughly examining them. The evidence was easy to find. I found photos of him with this woman, hotel receipts, and even an email confirmation for reservations to a romantic resort. According to the schedule, they must have had this accident on the way home from the resort. The accident was a car crash on a mountain road. No one else was injured, and neither Steve nor this Yasmin woman appeared to be in life-threatening condition. However, since Steve had injured his leg, and it might be difficult for him to walk properly for a while, normally I should be worried about him as a wife, but I don't have that feeling anymore. I couldn't believe he lied about visiting his parents, saying he was worried about them, much less was lying to cover up an affair with another woman. I wondered if Steve's recent strange behavior, such as dyeing his hair and getting his ears pierced, was due to the influence of this woman. I told a fellow nurse and asked her to refer me to a lawyer who was good at divorce matters. The next day, I headed to the hospital room with my husband's belongings. My husband seemed to have hit his head and was so confused that he could not remember what had happened in the treatment room yesterday. Honestly, I didn't even care about the truth anymore. I left the hospital room without even having a conversation with him because I had a shift to get to. When I finished work, I went to see my lawyer and told him what happened. He told me that with that much evidence, I would have enough to sue. I just wanted to get a divorce as soon as possible. I couldn't have that man come out of the hospital and live in the same space. I felt so betrayed by my husband that my anger outweighed my sadness. From there, I found a new place to live and moved out on my own. Only my husband's belongings remain in the house. I planned to be patient until the day my husband was discharged from the hospital. I thought about divorcing him while he was in the hospital, but he is in the hospital where I work, so it would be troublesome if something happened to him there. Then, we could get a divorce when he gets out of the hospital. I drove to pick my husband up from the hospital. I have to make a quick stop. Please come with me. He looked at me strangely, but nodded. I headed for a family restaurant near our house. When I entered the restaurant with my husband, the lawyer was waiting for us. My husband looked at me as if he didn't understand what was going on, but I guess he was tired of standing on a leg that was not fully healed yet. He sat down quietly, and I thrust the divorce papers at him. "Divorce? Why?" my husband shouted in a crazy voice. I seethed in my anger silently for a moment. "What do you mean, why? You had an affair. You even had your accident on your romantic trip. The evidence of your affair was found in our own home. What do you think you're doing? Besides, you lied about your father not feeling well. You lied about going to your parents' house to see this woman." My husband's face turned pale. "You think I am naive? Yasmin, the woman you were having an affair with, is out of the hospital. I heard that her injuries were less severe than yours. I can't believe she was brought to the hospital where I work." I smiled wryly, and my husband's face turned even paler. "You will pay for the anguish you've caused me." I handed him the divorce papers and a pen. My husband did not take the pen. "Is it only your leg that's injured, or have you lost the use of your hand as well?" I sarcastically said to him, and he finally picked up the pen. But he wouldn't sign. He only stared at the paper. "Why don't you sign it? Are you scared at the idea of starting over? You think this was just some game?" My husband froze, as if I had hit the nail on the head. I gave him a cold stare. "You're kidding, right? I can't be with my husband with the cheater's name tattooed right on his body." He looked at me in surprise. What? What are you talking about?" He may have been trying to deceive me, but I was unmoved. "You really don't remember? I was there when you were rushed to the emergency room. You were yelling at me not to look." Then my husband's face changed color. "Sound familiar? I saw the tattoo on the inside of your thigh, too. But what kind of a man tattoos his mistress's name on his body? Even if we didn't get divorced, do you think you can hide it from me?" My husband was slack-jawed. "No, it's not. That's not it," he said. I could only sigh at the sight of my husband. Dyed hair, pierced ears, and tattoos, and with the name of the person you cheated on your wife with? At least do it after you get divorced. While Steve was in the hospital, I actually met Yasmin face to face. I didn't go out of my way to see her or anything. We just bumped into one another. She was lost in the hospital, looking for the gift shop, and she asked me for directions. The gift shop is just around the corner. Oh, and you're Yasmin, right? My husband is Steve, I said, as she checked my nameplate, turned pale, and left at a speed that was hard to believe for an injured person. Please don't run in the hospital, I called after her. I think she was more embarrassed than I was. She probably heard from Steve that I worked here, but she probably never thought she would run into me at such a big hospital. Quite the stroke of luck. Seeing how my husband said he would rather start over with me than with someone he was supposedly loved enough to get a tattoo, I asked my Steve if he had been dumped by Yasmin. Steve didn't think I would ever find out, and apparently would rather suffer and stay married to me rather than have me file for alimony. I can't believe he thought he wouldn't get caught with her name tattooed on his body, and breaking up with him wouldn't erase the fact that he cheated on her, though. Nurses have a high rate of attracting the wrong kind of men. I'd been the same way, but when I married Steve, I thought he was a serious man and that he wouldn't betray me. And then he was stupid enough to get a tattoo of the person he cheated on me with, which is the worst thing ever. I'm so blind. I'll leave the rest to the attorneys, and I hope I never see him again. The lawyer looked at me and nodded. I've moved out, so you'll have to get a cab or whatever to get home on your own. Bye. My husband looked at me with a pitiful face, his mouth agape. He would probably be crippled until his leg wound healed, but he deserved it. After that, I was divorced without incident. I also got alimony. Thanks to that, Steve was left broke and bankrupt. To his surprise, he found out that Yasmin was married to a colleague from his office, and they had actually found out by chance that he and her husband were online game buddies. Of course, Yasmin's husband filed a claim for alimony against her as well. I heard that Steve had to quit his job, and the rumors just keep on spreading. But I got the alimony paid, and I don't care if Steve quits his job or not. After the divorce was finalized, my former in-laws contacted me, but they were furious when I politely explained the situation. They apologized to me and said they would never let Steve hurt me again. This time, the word spread among my fellow nurses, but they all laughed it off, and I am still laughing my way through it. Now, I live alone, and I'm free to do whatever I want.
My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm a 23-year-old office worker, married for 2 years now. I have a son, Leo, who just turned 1. My husband, Nathan, is 29 and also works for a company. Nathan frequently suggests that I quit my job at my father's company, a sentiment stemming from his dislike for my parents. His distaste for my parents appears to be linked to the fact that my father is a high school dropout and runs a small and grimy company, manufacturing screws and small components. Nathan hates the idea of people knowing he's related to such a company. On the other hand, I admire my father for his tireless dedication to research, his courage, not afraid of failure, and his genuine care for his employees. Thus, I have no intention of leaving my father's company. He seems to dislike the fact that I respect my father more than him. One morning, while having breakfast with Nathan and our son Leo, Nathan brought it up again.
Alyssa, you should really think about getting a job at a bigger company. Considering you graduated from a prestigious university, you're beautiful, and I want to brag about you at work. But I can't, because your workplace is awful. And honestly, I earn enough for us. Why don't you consider becoming a housewife?
This conversation has been over and over again. Every time it comes up, I repeat the same answer, that I will not quit my father's company. Typically, these discussions conclude with Nathan making threatening remarks to me like,
"You're the only one in the world who doesn't listen to me."
or,
"If you keep this up, it's going to be harder for us to stay together."
after this, he usually leaves, but it doesn't end there. Following these discussions, Nathan often does something to upset me and then gloats.
"Still, won't you listen to me now?"
While I can't say divorce is out of the question, I can't bring myself to do it. Both our parents get along so well and love Leo so much, it would break my heart to upset them. My father and father-in-law are good friends, going golfing and fishing together. My mother and mother-in-law also get along very well, frequently going to art exhibitions together. Both sets of parents adore Leo and have provided him with a loving environment that I wouldn't want to take away. Regardless, my love for Nathan has faded away. I don't even like sleeping in the same bed with him. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in the child's room with a lock on the door. The reason I added the lock was that Nathan would come into the room while I was sleeping with Leo and start complaining about my father's company. Leo was scared and cried due to Nathan's loud voice in the dark. Since then, Nathan has stopped coming in at night, but I still lock the door just to be safe. As for the harassment I received from Nathan this morning for refusing to quit my father's company, it was as always, just as petty. Despite dinner being ready, he didn't come home. Instead, he went to a night bar with colleagues and sent me a photo of him with a big smile, his face close to one of the female staff. This kind of photo doesn't hurt me or make me feel insecure. As soon as I saw the photo he sent on my messaging app, a new message came in.
See, this is how I blow off steam, because you won't listen to me.
He said,
If you don't want me to do this anymore, quit your father's company now.
Honestly, I wanted to ignore his message, but for the sake of both sets of parents and our son Leo, I responded. This was my best response. I just wanted you to come straight home and have dinner with us. In response, he texted back.
Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now.
I found myself regretting marrying him, thinking even though he is smart, his character and thought process are so childlike. Then one day, Nathan happily reported,
I might be getting promoted soon.
Wow, that's great. Did that recent deal come through?
It's not finalized yet, but it's as good as done. I bet the boss will be thrilled, crying with joy. Even the director, who used to act so high and mighty, will have to bow down to me now. Ha ha.
That day, Nathan unusually didn't tell me to quit my father's job and went off to his company. As for me, I left home with Leo to go to my office. After dropping Leo off at my parents' house nearby as usual, I went to work where my coworker, Jake, hurriedly approached me.
Good morning, Alyssa. The boss seems unusually angry today. Did something happen? Everyone is worried about him.
Upon hearing this, I knocked and entered the room marked Invention Room, where my father was. There sat a young man in his 20s, with a tear-streaked face on the sofa. Sitting across from him was my father, his face more furious than I had ever seen.
Sorry, Alyssa. I can't spare the time to chat with you right now,
he said, to which I responded, Everyone's worried about you. What's going on? Apologizing, he invited me to sit in on the conversation. As I took a seat next to my father and looked at the young man's face, he stood up to introduce himself.
Nice to meet you. I'm Scott. I'm sorry for causing the boss any trouble.
I asked him, May I know what happened? Scott, apparently an employee with an electrical machinery manufacturer, started to explain. It seems that Scott is employed at an electrical machinery manufacturer. Moreover, he's been promoted to the position of assistant leader for a new machinery project. Interestingly, the designated leader doesn't attend meetings or go to the field, basically serving as a figurehead. The team members reportedly prefer this, stating, It's easier that way. In essence, Mr. Scott was fulfilling the leader's role. It appears that some components from my father's company were chosen for the project. Scott, without any prior arrangement, visited my father's company and rudely demanded,
I need to speak to the CEO.
His appearance, characterized by his unkempt hair and numerous rings, didn't sit well with my father's secretaries, fondly known as Jackson and Randy, who told Scott,
Please adjust your attitude and appearance before coming back.
Unaware of what was wrong with his demeanor and looks, Scott returned to his company and asked his boss, who snapped,
Don't let them walk all over you. Assert yourself and tell them we're using their parts.
Wanting to fill his colleagues' wishes to use my father's company's components, Scott returned to my father's company and humbly asked Jackson and Randy,
Please let me know what I'm doing wrong.
My father, who happened to overhear the conversation, talked with Scott in the meeting room.
We don't judge people by their appearances. I believe they were just trying to teach you workplace manners,
his father said. Jackson and Randy agreed and proceeded to instruct Scott on professional etiquette. With such an appearance, when you visit other companies, they'll likely judge your entire company based on how you present yourself. When asked,
Which company do you think one can have a decent conversation with? One where people are well-dressed and respectful of manners, or one that isn't?
Scott apparently replied,
The former, but let me apologize and start again.
Following that, Scott made an appointment, showed up with his back straight, fixed hair, and without any accessories. As we talked with Scott, we saw his sincerity and commitment to his work, not only in terms of components, but my father said that he was so willing to cooperate with ideas and knowledge. That's how they ended up collaborating. Young members of Scott's company proactively visited my father's company for advice. However, just before a prototype was almost completed after nearly 6 months, it was revealed that the leader had taken all the presentation materials that were prepared. Not only that, but the assistant leader was removed, and a young female employee who he favored was promoted. Although the team and the collaborators vehemently opposed this, they were silenced with threats such as, anyone who objects will be made uncomfortable in the company by spreading various rumors. Upon hearing this, my father was furious. Jackson, who had been listening in the background, said,
About those various rumors, they're just going to spread lies, right? You shouldn't be scared, right?
However, the reason the assistant leader was removed was apparently because he reported a violation of working hours to the HR department. Scott said that after severe warnings, the assistant leader was removed. The reason Scott came to my father's company this time was because he was frustrated that the person in charge would change despite all he had done for him, and he wanted to discuss everything.
You should quit that company and come work for ours, right, boss?
All right, Jackson and Randy, are you ready?
My father, impersonating an iconic Western movie character, made everyone except Scott burst into laughter. Scott said,
Despite doing such amazing work, you all seem to be having fun. I've always admired that. I really wanted to work with you all.
And he pleaded with teary eyes, bowing his head joyfully to my father. There was something that had been bothering me after listening to his story. So I asked Scott a question. I asked, What's the name of your company? And it turned out to be the same machinery manufacturing company as my husband's. Hesitantly, I asked further, Can I ask the name of the leader? And as I had feared, he replied,
His name is Nathan Johnson.
Upon hearing that, my father and I held our heads in shock. After a brief silence, Randy said,
I knew I'd heard that name before. It's Alyssa's husband.
I said, Scott, I'm sorry, that's my husband. And Scott said,
He's the one who gave me the opportunity to work at this company. So I'm actually grateful to him now.
Jackson seemed to have something on his mind, too, and asked cautiously,
I hate to ask, but given that Alyssa's here, does the favored female employee have any relation with your husband?
Scott looked at my face and seemed to have difficulty speaking. So I said, Don't worry about it. I'm in a sham marriage with my husband. I don't have feelings for him anymore. Which surprised my father. After apologizing to my flustered father, I honestly told him about all the things that had been said and done to me every day, and why I hadn't been able to speak up. He understood and said,
No wonder my grandson Leo hasn't been very affectionate with me.
Then, after hearing everything, he added,
I've lived a life that I'm not ashamed of, so I don't care what anyone says about me. But it must be tough for Alyssa to keep hearing bad things about her parents. Don't worry, though. I'll keep my relationship with their parents since they're family and friends. If you ever want to come home, you're always welcome.
His words made me feel like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders.
And what about the relationship between your husband and this favored female employee?
Jackson asked. Scott replied,
There's no solid evidence, just rumors. But it's the talk of the company. Several employees have seen the two of them coming out of meeting rooms or document rooms. A few employees have even seen them going out for lunch together.
At this point, Randy began making a phone call.
Hey, I have a case that I'd like you to investigate. Can you come to the office right now?
After hanging up, he said,
I'm going to have a friend of mine at the private detection agency look into this.
Now, Jackson started to make a phone call as well.
Hello? I need a lawyer who specializes in divorce due to infidelity. Oh, you can? Can you come to the office right now? Thanks.
As Jackson and Randy made progress on their calls, my dad said,
Your greatest strength has to be your ability to take action.
He was laughing as he watched the scene unfold. Scott also offered to keep a careful eye on the two of them. For the time being, everyone returned to their workplaces to get back to work. My father, too, expressed his concern to the worried employees, saying,
I'm sorry for the concern, but it looks like we can laugh about it now. My apologies for causing worry, and thank you, as always.
Hearing this, smiles returned to the faces of the employees, and the usual lively atmosphere was restored in the workplace. My father came over to me and asked,
May I discuss the recent events with your in-laws?
To which I replied, I just want you to tell them to continue visiting and showing affection for Leo, as I always have. By early afternoon, a private detective and a lawyer arrived to discuss our future course of action in the planning room. The contents of this meeting were then shared with everyone present. It was decided that Jackson, who had returned to the company, would convey the details of the discussion. After work, when I went to pick up Leo from my parents' house, I explained the situation from my own perspective, apologizing for my inability to reveal my husband's true nature. I felt as if I had trampled on the feelings of my parents, who believed we were living happily. My mother, far from being upset, seemed thrilled, declaring, Now we need to prepare a room for my daughter and grandson. She had not missed the disdainful look my husband had given my father's company the first time he saw it, and suspected he was not a good man. I wish you had told me sooner. The next day, it appeared Jackson received a phone call on his smartphone from Scott. Scott had submitted his resignation, informing the company he intended to spend his remaining time on miscellaneous tasks and transitioning his responsibilities without taking any paid time off. The company accepted his resignation. However, all the members of the project team reportedly visited the HR department to state, We have all violated the company's work rules like Mr. Scott, so please discipline us as well. Upon seeing resignation letters in everyone's hands, the HR department was thrown into a frenzy. My husband had already left home by the end of regular working hours, so a meeting was held in the large conference room between the company president, department heads, and the remaining project members, including Scott. There it was stated that my husband, who was the team leader, had not attended any meetings or been present at work, and had in fact not contributed at all to the project. Further, it was reported that when he learned that the presentation and required documents had been completed by the entire team, he took all the credit, removed Scott from his position as deputy leader, and replaced him with a female employee he favored. The company president reportedly expressed deep regret if this was indeed true. At that point, Scott suggested that no drastic action be taken until all evidence was gathered. The reason he gave was that as the sister-in-law of one of the company's clients, they were also conducting an investigation using a private detective, and it was proposed that nothing be said to my husband without evidence. The company agreed to wait until the evidence was collected, and then to question my husband before deciding on disciplinary action. They asked the team members to hold off on their resignations. Unaware of these serious events, my husband, who usually comes home on time, returned home around 9 p.m. after Leo had gone to bed. He began ranting about how useless everyone else was, boasting about how he had been working overtime to make the project a success. He thought everyone was just jealous because he was going to be promoted to department head after the project's success. Knowing the truth, I couldn't help but chuckle at his delusions. In his good mood, I gave him a few compliments, which I didn't really mean. He seemed to enjoy picturing himself as department head, being looked up to and envied. My husband kept grinning. The next day at work, Scott's plan was put into action. All team members began to continuously praise my husband.
Mr. Department Head, not quite yet.
It seems the CEO is very hopeful about this project.
How can we become competent men like you, Mr. Johnson?
Continuously showered with such compliments, my husband was thrilled and in a constant state of excitement. His guard seemed to be dropping. Then, as planned, we were able to obtain a video of my husband's affair with a female employee from the hidden cameras set up in the document room and the conference room. In just 5 days, a ton of evidence of his infidelity had been collected by both the detective agency and Scott. All that was left was to prove that my husband had not been the one to create the project documents. The proof was easy. Scott had also saved the documents on a USB drive, and it would be clear to the company if they asked him and my husband about the contents of the documents. All of the evidence was submitted to the company by Scott and other members. My husband came home in high spirits, unaware of all of this. Then he began his flight of fantasy, saying,
I'm definitely going to be made department head. The CEO was talking to the current head for a long time. And then the head looked at me. He probably said, I'd rather have Mr. Johnson as head than any incompetent like you.
He then continued his fantasy talk.
With this, the gap between your father's company and mine will widen even more. You should quit your job and become a full-time housewife. You'll be the wife of a department head,
he said. I replied loudly, seemingly angry. Your parents will be mad if they knew you were mocking my parents. You know they're good friends. I take pride in my work and enjoy it. I will absolutely not quit. My husband got angry and said,
Never invite your parents to our family events. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women flocking around me as soon as I become department head.
When I asked, Are you sure about this? He replied,
What do you mean? Don't contact me again.
So I responded, All right, I'll leave. And I had him sign the prepared divorce papers. The next morning, I saw my husband go to work in silence, and then I called my father to help me move. As my father, company workers, and I were loading our belongings onto a truck, my in-laws arrived saying, We came to help. My in-laws apologized to me, and I apologized to them. Thank you for letting us be Leo's grandparents. Our idiot son is disowned. We're counting on you from now on, Alyssa. As they both bowed their heads, I held their hands and said, Thank you, while also bowing my head. My father said,
Let's hurry up and move so we can relax at home.
To which my father-in-law responded,
Let's do that,
and continued helping with the move. The move went smoothly, and in front of my parents and in-laws, I showed them the signed divorce papers and explained that I was getting a divorce from my husband. My in-laws apologized repeatedly, but my father responded,
Let's continue to get along, Ken,
and playfully patted my father-in-law's knee. My mother said, Mary, let's continue to do embroidery together. There's an art exhibition next week. Let's go. And playfully patted my mother-in-law's knee. My father said,
Ken, Mary, why don't you stay at our house tonight? Let's have a drink.
And brought out some drinks. My father-in-law said,
Thanks. We'll take you up on that offer tonight.
And my parents and in-laws got along even better. Not wanting to get in the way, I decided to go to Leo's room and go to sleep. The next day, my husband was called into a conference room by executives like the CEO and department head. In addition to the executives, Scott, the team members, and the female employee he had an affair with were also there. The hearing for my husband was conducted by the CEO himself. First, he was asked if he intended to claim the project as his own without participating in it and stealing the documents when they were completed. Since Scott and the team members were present, it seemed he couldn't make any excuses. The CEO, growing impatient with my husband's silence, demanded loudly,
Well, what do you have to say?
My husband, it seems, quickly admitted to his actions. Next, he was asked why he had removed Scott from the sub-leader position and replaced him with a female employee. My husband responded,
I thought she was more capable than Mr. Scott.
But the department head retorted,
Are you saying the lady who does nothing more than serving tea and making copies is more capable than Mr. Scott?
My husband bit his lip, lowered his head, and fell silent. The CEO then exclaimed,
The real reason is this, isn't it?
And proceeded to project still images from the video footage taken in the conference room and the document room. Both my husband and the female employee, Alice, turned pale. When the CEO asked Alice,
Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?
Alice responded unabashedly, Mr. Johnson said that if we were together, he'd make it easy for me to earn my salary. Besides, I have a boyfriend, so I wasn't serious about being with him. I just thought of it as part of the job. My husband was infuriated by her response, exclaiming,
You had a boyfriend, you cheating woman. You've ruined my life.
You have a wife too, Nathan. Don't get mad at me, Alice retorted, and a quarrel ensued. The CEO fed up and announced,
The fact-checking is over. I'll inform you of the disciplinary action later. Until then, Mr. Johnson and Miss Ford, you're both suspended and should stay at home.
With that, he left the conference room, and everybody else quickly followed suit. As a result, my husband was reassigned to the menial job of sorting documents in a basement, what's commonly referred to as a useless department at the company. Alice, after her boyfriend found out about her affair, had a hard time at the office and eventually chose to resign as well. A lawyer had prepared an agreement for them to sign, and my husband was to pay me $3 million and Alice $2 million as consolation money. They both ended up taking loans from consumer finance companies to cover these payments. Moreover, I had my husband agree to pay an additional $5,000 per month for Leo's child support. A few months later, my husband, who had been disowned by his parents, was working 2 jobs, at a convenience store during the day and as a security guard for a parking lot at night, and living alone in an old apartment. Someone who saw him said he looked as if he was about 60 years old. He had aged so much.